I was sitting at the far end of the table at Maple Grove Diner, the same place where my late husband used to take us every Sunday after church, when my daughter leaned back in her chair, smirked, and said loudly enough for the whole room to hear, "Mom, you've always been worthless." The word hit me like a slap. People at the neighboring tables turned their heads. Forks paused mid-air. The smell of fried chicken and burnt coffee lingered in the air, but all I could taste was humiliation. I looked at her. My only child, the little girl I once carried on my hip through snowstorms, the one I worked double shifts at the nursing home to raise. Her blonde hair shimmered under the diner's neon light, and next to her sat her husband, Greg, in his perfect tailored suit. He didn't even flinch. He just stirred his iced tea with a silver straw like nothing had happened. "Why would you say that, Rachel?" I whispered. My voice cracked. In front of everyone, she laughed, not kindly, not nervously, but cruelly. "Because it's true, Mom. You've never done anything with your life. You wasted everything Dad left us. You can't even pay your own bills without asking for help. I wanted to disappear right there to shrink smaller than the salt shaker between us." The waitress, a young woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, hesitated by the counter, unsure whether to keep refilling our water glasses or flee the scene. "I didn't waste anything," I said quietly. "Your father's savings went to your college tuition and your wedding." Rachel's tone sharpened. "Oh, don't start with that again. That was 20 years ago. You chose to live small. You chose to stay stuck in that house like some ghost from the past." The house. The same 2-story home my husband and I built with our bare hands in 1984. The same house I'd been paying taxes on roof repairs, on lawn services, on all from my $18 an hour retirement job at the grocery store. Greg finally looked up, smirking. "Rachel's right, Margaret. You should think about downsizing. You're sitting on nearly $680,000 worth of property, and for what? It's too much for one old lady. Maybe it's time to sell." My stomach turned. I knew that tone, that polished, polite way of making theft sound like concern. "I'm not selling my home," I said. "That house is all I have left of your father." Rachel rolled her eyes. "You always make it about Dad. He's gone, Mom. You can't live in the past forever." A quiet voice spoke up from the next booth. It was the waitress, barely older than my granddaughter. "Ma'am," she said gently, "your pie's getting cold." I looked at her and saw pity, not the kind that burns, but the kind that breaks you a little more. "I don't want pie," I whispered. Rachel leaned closer, lowering her voice but keeping the venom. "You think you're some martyr, don't you, living alone in that dusty museum? Do you know how embarrassing it is when people ask what my mom does? You sit at home watching reruns and paying bills you can't afford. Rachel, no, you need to hear this." Her hand slammed against the table, the plates rattled. "You're nothing but a burden, Mom. You were a burden when I was growing up, and you still are now." Every word dug into me like broken glass. Around us, the diner had gone completely silent. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. And then, as if to twist the knife, Greg added with a smile, "Don't worry. Once everything's finalized, you'll be taken care of." "Finalized?" I asked. Rachel crossed her arms. "The estate, Mom. The new arrangement. You'll see." For a moment, I didn't understand. Estate? What estate? My husband's will had been settled years ago. I'd never changed a thing. But Rachel just smirked again and sipped her coffee, the gold bracelet on her wrist, catching the diner's light. "You'll see soon enough," she said. The room seemed to close in. My chest tightened and I suddenly felt the sting of tears threatening to spill. That's when I heard a voice from the entrance, calm, professional, cutting through the thick silence like a knife. "Mrs. Whitaker," I turned. It was Mr. Daniels, my late husband's old lawyer. He stood in the doorway holding a brown envelope. His expression was unreadable, but his tone carried weight. He walked toward our table past the frozen stairs and placed the envelope in front of me. "I think it's time you saw this," he said. Rachel's smile faltered. Greg's hand froze on his glass. "What's that?" she asked, her voice tightening. Mr. Daniels adjusted his glasses. "The real will." The air left the room. Even the waitress gasped softly. I looked down at the envelope, my name written in my husband's handwriting, the same looping letters I hadn't seen since the funeral 12 years ago. My hands trembled as I reached for it. Rachel's voice was sharp now, panicked. "What are you talking about?" The will was already. Mr. Daniels cut her off. "No, Rachel. That was the copy you and your husband filed. This," he tapped the envelope, "is the original." And just like that, every cruel word my daughter had said moments before began to echo differently. I didn't know what was inside yet, but for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt since my husband's death. Hope. I didn't open the envelope right away. My hands shook too much, and the sound of the diner, the soft hum of conversations, the clinking of forks, the jukebox playing an old country tune, all faded into a dull roar. Rachel sat frozen across from me, her face tight and pale. Greg leaned toward her, whispering something under his breath, but I couldn't hear them anymore. All I could think about was the man whose handwriting was on that envelope, Thomas Whitaker, my husband for 37 years. Thomas was the kind of man who never forgot to warm my car before I left for my night shift. He worked at the auto plant outside Columbus for almost 4 decades, saving every extra dollar for Rachel's future. "She's going to have the life we never did," Maggie, he'd say, calling me by that nickname only he used. I believed him. I believed in him. And for a while, everything we did was for her. When Rachel got into Ohio State, we threw a backyard barbecue for the whole neighborhood. I remember standing over the grill, tears in my eyes, thinking she made it. All those sleepless nights, all those second jobs, every unpaid bill we managed to stretch. It was worth it. We sold Thomas's fishing boat to cover her first-year tuition. I picked up double shifts at the nursing home cleaning rooms and folding sheets while my back screamed in pain. But I did it with pride, because that's what mothers do. We build our children's dreams on the bones of our own. After Thomas died of a stroke 12 years ago, the house got quieter. I still made coffee for 2 every morning, still folded towels in pairs, still talked to him when I cooked his favorite stew. I couldn't move on, but I didn't want to. That house, our $680 $1,000 home on Birchwood Lane, was all I had left of him. Every nail, every creak in the floor carried his voice. When Rachel married Greg, I thought maybe life would feel full again. Greg was charming, successful, the kind of man who drove a black Tesla and talked about real estate opportunities at family dinners. He hugged me at their wedding and said, "Don't worry, Mom, we'll take good care of you." I wanted to believe him. But after the wedding calls stopped coming, visits grew shorter. Birthdays were just text messages. Then came the first signs, small but sharp. "Mom, maybe you should sell the Buick. You don't drive much." "Mom, that house must be expensive to maintain. Wouldn't you rather move somewhere smaller? Mom, you should think about your future. You're not getting any younger." They said it kindly, but I could feel the weight behind those words. And when I lost my job at the grocery store last year, not because I couldn't work, but because they replaced me with a self-checkout system, Rachel's tone changed. She started sighing when I called, started saying, "Mom, you have to learn to be more independent." Independent. That word stung more than any insult. I'd spent my whole life being independent. Thomas and I built our world from nothing. We didn't inherit a cent. When I got sick that winter, pneumonia kept me in bed for weeks. I didn't tell Rachel. I didn't want to bother her. But when she found out, she yelled at me for not planning better. "You could have died in that house alone," she said. "If you just moved into assisted living, none of this would happen." Assisted living, the nursing home where I used to work, the one that charged $400, $500 a month for a shared room. I remember lying awake that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering when I'd become the burden she saw me as. When love had turned into inconvenience, I wasn't blind. I knew Greg's business wasn't doing as well as he claimed. I'd overheard them whispering about debt, about property, about liquidating assets. It wasn't hard to guess who or what they meant. And yet, even after everything, a part of me still believed Rachel would never hurt me. Not really. She was my daughter. My baby girl who used to fall asleep on my chest while I sang, "You Are My Sunshine." That night after the diner, I went home and sat on the old recliner in Thomas's office. The envelope lay in my lap like a living thing. I stared at it for hours, tracing the loops of his handwriting with my thumb. Finally, around midnight, I took a deep breath and opened it. Inside were several pages yellowed, folded neatly. The first line read, This is the last will and testament of Thomas E. Whitaker, dated March 22nd, 2011. My heart pounded as I scanned the words. It wasn't the version Rachel and Greg had filed. This one was older, maybe truer. And then at the bottom of the first page, I saw something that made my hands go cold. A second envelope, smaller, my name written on it. On the back in Thomas's handwriting again, for Margaret, open only when they come for the house. For a moment, I just stared. I didn't understand what it meant. When they come for the house, but deep down, I already knew. He'd seen this coming. Thomas had known our daughter, the one we'd raised with love and sacrifice, would one day try to take everything from me. 3 weeks passed before I saw Rachel again. She called me on a Wednesday afternoon, her voice too bright, too sweet. "Mom, we're having a family dinner this Sunday. Just a small thing. Greg wants to celebrate his new business deal." "You'll come, right?" I hesitated. After what happened at the diner, I didn't know if I could sit across from her without feeling that sting again. But then she added softly, "It's been too long, Mom. We miss you." For a moment, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think maybe she regretted what she'd said. Maybe she realized how cruel she'd been. So I said yes. That Sunday, I put on my nicest blue cardigan, the one Thomas bought me at JCPenney years ago, and baked an apple pie. Rachel used to love my pies when she was little. She'd sneak a spoonful of filling before it went into the oven and giggle when I pretended to scold her. When I arrived at their house, or rather their $2 million modern home in the suburbs of Columbus, I felt out of place the moment I stepped inside. Everything gleamed white marble counters, glass staircase, artwork that looked more like confusion than art. Rachel greeted me at the door with a half smile. "Mom, you made pie. How sweet." Greg came up behind her, holding a glass of wine. "Good to see you, Margaret. Hope you're hungry." Rachel went all out. I noticed the table already set for 8 people, her friends, his colleagues. Not family, strangers. "Where's Lily?" I asked about my granddaughter. Rachel hesitated. "She's out with friends. She's 17, Mom. She has a life." I nodded, hiding the small ache in my chest. I missed that girl more than she knew. Dinner started normal enough. Greg boasted about a new investment property in Florida. Rachel laughed at all his jokes, her hand on his arm like a trophy. I mostly listened, sipping water, trying not to feel invisible. But then the conversation shifted. "So, Mom," Rachel began twirling her fork, "have you thought more about what we discussed? Selling the house?" I set my fork down slowly. "Rachel, we've talked about this. I'm not selling." Her smile tightened. "It's just, with the market the way it is, it makes sense. Greg knows people who could get you over $700 or $1,000 easy. You could move somewhere smaller, cozier, maybe near a retirement community. Retirement community." I repeated my voice barely above a whisper. Greg jumped in. "You'd love it, Margaret. Activities, friends your age, medical staff nearby. We even looked into a few Maple View sunny acres." "I'm not moving into a home," I said sharply. The room went quiet. One of Greg's colleagues cleared his throat awkwardly. Rachel leaned back in her chair, her tone turning icy. "Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be. You can't take care of that big place alone. The roof, the yard, the taxes I've managed just fine for 12 years, I said. Her eyes narrowed. "Yeah, but for how much longer? Do you even know how much you're spending every month I did? Every bill, every receipt. I'd always known." What she didn't know was that Thomas had left me a safety net, a modest investment account, hidden until I truly needed it. But I said nothing. Greg smiled politely. "Rachel's just thinking long term. You know, financial planning." "I'm not your client," I replied. "I'm your mother-in-law." The tension grew thick. Rachel's friends shifted in their seats, pretending to be fascinated by their plates. Then, as if to ease the moment, Rachel stood up and clinked her glass. "Okay, everyone. Before dessert, we have a little announcement." She turned to me, smiling too wide. "Mom, you'll want to hear this." Greg stood beside her, his arm around her waist. "We've decided to buy your house, Margaret. You'll still live there rent-free, of course, but we'll handle all the paperwork, the taxes, the upkeep. It's the responsible thing." I stared at them speechless. "You're what Rachel beamed. You should be happy, Mom. You'll never have to worry about bills again. I felt my face go cold. That's not generosity, that's control. Her smile faded. Don't be dramatic. We're trying to help. By taking my home, by protecting it. Greg corrected. If something happened to you, do you really want the house tied up in probate court? We're family. Family. The word tasted sour now. I looked around the table. Everyone was watching, pretending not to. One woman bit her lip, another whispered something to her husband. Finally, one guest, a middle-aged man I didn't recognize, cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said gently, "but shouldn't she have a choice in that?" Rachel's face flushed. "This doesn't concern you." But it did. The man's eyes met mine, kind, steady. "Ma'am, don't sign anything you don't understand." I nodded faintly, my throat too tight to speak. Rachel's tone turned sharp. "Mom, he doesn't know what he's talking about. We're doing this for you." "For me," I said. "Or for the deed." She slammed her napkin down. "You know what? Forget it. You never appreciate anything we do." Greg muttered something about old people and paranoia, and a few guests laughed nervously. The humiliation burned hotter than coffee spilled on bare skin. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. "I think I've lost my appetite." Rachel crossed her arms. "You're being ridiculous," maybe I said, "but ridiculous is better than robbed." I walked toward the door, ignoring their whispers. My heart pounded, but my mind was clear. Because for the first time, I understood what Thomas meant in that letter when they come for the house. They already had. I didn't go to Rachel's house for weeks after that dinner. Her words kept circling my head like vultures. "You're being ridiculous. You should be grateful." Every time I passed the framed picture of her in her cap and gown, I felt a sharp ache in my chest. I'd given her everything, my time, my savings, my heart, and in return, she looked at me like a bill she couldn't wait to pay off. Then one Friday morning, a cream-colored envelope appeared in my mailbox. The return address was Rachel's. Inside was an invitation printed on glossy paper, "Family Celebration Dinner, in honor of Greg's business expansion. Sunday, 6 p.m., dress formal." At the bottom, in her handwriting, "Please come, Mom. Let's start over." I almost tore it up, but some part of me, the foolish, hopeful part that still remembered her as a little girl with frosting on her cheeks, wanted to believe she meant it. So I ironed my best blouse, brushed my gray hair, and took the old Buick out of the garage. The Ohio air was cold that evening, the kind that makes your joints ache and your memories heavier. When I arrived, the house was lit up like a showroom. Cars lined the driveway, BMWs, Audis, a Tesla I didn't recognize. Inside, laughter echoed through the rooms. Rachel saw me first. She wore a red dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension. "Mom, you made it," she said, kissing my cheek quickly before turning back to a group of guests. "Everyone. This is my mother, Margaret." Their eyes swept over me. Polite smiles, detached nods. I felt like a relic in a museum of money. Dinner was served in their oversized dining room. The table gleamed under a chandelier that looked like it belonged in a hotel lobby. Rachel sat at the head, Greg beside her, and I, as usual, was placed at the far end, next to the caterer's station. Halfway through the meal, after Greg toasted to success and family legacy, Rachel stood up and clinked her glass. "Mom," she said, "we have something important to share tonight." My stomach tightened. Greg smiled. "It's about the house, Margaret. We talked to our lawyer. Everything's been arranged." I frowned. Arranged for what? Rachel's tone turned almost cheerful. "For you to transfer the deed to us, of course. It's the smartest move for taxes and estate planning. We'll handle all the legal stuff you just sign." Laughter murmured around the table as if it were all perfectly normal. I stared at her. "You're asking me to give you my home?" Greg chuckled softly. No, not give. Just transfer ownership. It's all in the family." "I didn't agree to this." Rachel's smile faltered. "Mom, don't make this ugly. We've already filed the preliminary paperwork." I felt my pulse spike. "You did what?" The room went still. Even the music from the Bluetooth speaker stopped. Rachel took a deep breath, her voice icy now. "You're being unreasonable. You can't manage that house anymore. It's falling apart and you're barely keeping up. You need to let us take over before something happens." "I don't need saving," I said, "and I sure don't need to be tricked." She folded her arms. "Tricked Mom, you should be thanking us. Greg spent hours with the lawyer making sure you're protected. I don't remember asking him to," I snapped. The guests exchanged glances. One woman whispered to her husband. Someone coughed to break the silence. Then Rachel's voice rose sharp, echoing through the room. "You can't even pay your bills, Mom. You're one step away from losing everything. Do you want to end up in a nursing home?" The words hit me like thunder. I felt heat rising in my face. "I've paid every bill with my own hands for 40 years. She laughed, cruel, dismissive. "With what? Your grocery store wages, your little pension? You think you can keep that house on $1,200 a month? Be serious." A few people chuckled awkwardly. The humiliation burned deeper than any wound. Then Greg leaned forward, his voice smooth as poison. "Rachel's only thinking of you, Margaret. We don't want you to end up destitute. You can't expect us to clean up the mess later." "Mess," I repeated. "You mean my life?" Rachel crossed her arms. "Don't twist it. We're being responsible. You never were." Something inside me cracked then, something that had been bending for years. "You have no idea what I've sacrificed," I said. My voice trembled, but didn't break. "Every dime I made went to your education, your wedding, your comfort." Rachel scoffed. "Oh, please, you didn't pay for everything. Greg and I worked hard for what we have." Greg nodded smugly. "Exactly. We earned this life. It's time you let go of the past. The past. That's what they called the only thing that ever mattered to me." Before I could speak, Rachel's tone shifted again, colder, sharper. "You're just jealous, Mom. You can't stand seeing me succeed when you never did. You lived your whole life small, poor, afraid, weak, and now you're clinging to that house like it makes you somebody." The words tore through me. Across the table, a young woman, one of Greg's assistants, maybe looked horrified. She reached for her napkin, whispering, "That's not fair." Rachel turned on her. "Stay out of it." The woman looked down, embarrassed. And that's when I felt it, the breaking point. The humiliation, the betrayal, the years of quiet endurance, all boiling into one sharp, trembling breath. I stood up. The chair screeched against the floor. "You want my house?" I said, voice shaking. "You want everything your father and I built? Then go ahead, take it. Take it all. But don't you dare call me worthless again." Rachel blinked, her mouth half open. "Because the only worthless thing in this room," I whispered, "is your heart." Gasps rippled through the guests. Someone muttered, "Jesus Christ." Greg stood quickly, his face red. "That's enough, Margaret." But before he could say another word, I turned and walked out the door. The cold air hit my face like water. My hands trembled as I unlocked the Buick. Behind me, I could still hear Rachel shouting, "You'll regret this. Mom, don't make us the enemy." I didn't look back, because deep down I knew they already were. For a few days after that dinner, the phone didn't stop ringing. Rachel called then. Greg, then Rachel again. Voicemails filled with fake sweetness wrapped in quiet threats. "Mom, we just need to talk about the paperwork. Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be." And then the last one, the one that made my blood run cold. "If you keep ignoring us, we'll have to handle things legally. Legally." That word echoed through my chest like a siren. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Every time I heard her voice, I felt that same sting from the diner, the same burning humiliation. So I stayed home, kept my blinds drawn, and tried to breathe. But peace doesn't last long when people smell money. The following Tuesday, I drove to the post office to pay a few bills, the property tax, the electric, the insurance. I came back home and froze. The front door was unlocked. At first I thought maybe I'd forgotten, but when I stepped inside, my heart stopped. Boxes lined the hallway. My kitchen cabinet stood open. In the living room, framed photos, mine and Thomas's wedding pictures. Baby photos of Rachel had been stacked like junk near the door. And standing there, clipboard in hand, was Greg. "Greg, what are you doing here?" I asked. He looked up casually like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Oh, hey, Margaret. We're just helping you start the move." "The what?" "The move," he repeated as if speaking to a child. "Rachel said you'd agreed to start packing. We found you a beautiful assisted living spot, Maple View. Remember? Everything's handled." I felt my pulse racing. "You went through my house." He shrugged. You left the door unlocked. No, I didn't. He smirked. Well, maybe Rachel still has her old key. Doesn't matter. We're just getting a head start. My voice cracked. You had no right. He sighed. Come on, Margaret. Don't make this emotional. We're trying to help you transition smoothly. You can't manage this place alone. I can and I will, I shouted. He rolled his eyes, scribbling something on his clipboard. Look, the movers will be here Thursday. The house will be listed by Friday. The realtor already took photos yesterday. When I could barely breathe, photos. You had someone come here without my permission. He smiled, polite and poisonous. Rachel's name is on the paperwork. You'll see. Once everything's finalized, you'll thank us. I felt dizzy. That house is mine, Greg. Mine. You can't just take it. He put the clipboard down and leaned in, voice low. You're old Margaret. The system doesn't work in your favor. You think the county will side with a widow who can't pay her bills? We've got lawyers, signatures, and patience. Something inside me shattered then, not from fear, from fury. I grabbed the nearest box and hurled it to the floor. Photos scattered Thomas holding baby Rachel, our first Christmas tree, our 25th anniversary cake. Greg flinched. Jesus, calm down. Get out of my house, I said. He straightened, buttoning his jacket. Fine, but don't say we didn't try to help you. He walked to the door, then paused. Oh, by the way, the utilities will be under our name starting next week. Don't worry, we'll cover them until the sale. And then he left, shutting the door behind him as if I were already gone. I stood there in the wreckage of my own life. Every inch of that home held a memory, a heartbeat, and they were stripping it away piece by piece like I was already dead. That night, I sat at the kitchen table staring at Thomas's photo. I don't know what to do, I whispered. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, and for the first time in years, I wished he were still here. He always knew what to say, how to fix things. Then around midnight, the doorbell rang. It was Lily, my granddaughter. Her hair was messy, her eyes red. Grandma, are you okay? Mom said you're moving. I forced a smile. I'm fine, sweetheart, just a misunderstanding. She looked around the boxes. This doesn't look like a misunderstanding. I didn't answer. I didn't want to drag her into the mess. But she walked to the table, saw the old will, and frowned. What's this? I froze. Where did you find that it was sticking out of a box? She picked it up, careful not to crease the paper. Is this Grandpa's? I nodded. The real one. She looked confused. What do you mean? I hesitated, then sighed. It means your mom and Greg have been lying. Her eyes widened. About what? About who this house belongs to. About what your grandfather wanted. She sat down across from me, clutching the papers. Grandma, do you want me to help you? That simple question almost broke me. For weeks, I'd felt invisible, powerless. And here was this 17-year-old girl, the only one who looked at me like I still mattered. Yes, I said finally. I do. She smiled faintly. Then let's make them regret ever calling you worthless. And in that moment, just as the night wind rattled the windows, I remembered the second envelope, the one Thomas had written, for Margaret, open only when they come for the house. My hands trembled as I took it out from the drawer. Lily leaned closer, whispering, Grandma, what if that's the key? I looked at her, my heart pounding the letter in my hands like a spark in the dark. Then maybe I said quietly, it's time to fight back. The house was quiet that night, too quiet. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed to hesitate between each second, as if afraid to move forward. Lily had gone home after insisting I lock the doors and call her if Greg or Rachel showed up again. She kissed my cheek before she left and whispered, Don't let them win, Grandma. Her words stayed with me long after she was gone. I sat at the kitchen table with the second envelope in front of me, my hands trembling. The paper had yellowed slightly with age, but Thomas's handwriting, steady, careful, full of love, hadn't faded. For a long time, I couldn't bring myself to open it. It felt sacred, like opening it would mean admitting he was truly gone, that he wasn't just in the next room fixing the leaky faucet or humming old country songs under his breath. But I knew I had to. He'd written those words for a reason, open only when they come for the house. So I took a deep breath, slid my finger under the flap, and unfolded the note inside. The smell of old paper hit me first, mixed with something faintly familiar, cedar and motor oil, the scent of Thomas's workshop. My heart squeezed. The letter was only 1 page long, but it might as well have been a thunderstorm in ink. Maggie. If you're reading this, it means they've come for what's ours. I wish I could stop it myself, but if there's one thing I've learned, it's that greed doesn't skip a generation. You always trusted too much. That's what I loved about you, but it's also what scares me now. There's a safety deposit box at Franklin Community Bank, box number 217. I kept copies of everything, the original deed, the updated will, and proof of the accounts. Rachel doesn't know about it. Neither does Greg. The lawyer Daniels does. If they ever try to take the house, you show him this letter. He'll know what to do. And Maggie, don't you ever let anyone call you worthless. You're the reason I had anything to give at all. Love, always, Thomas. I don't remember the last time I cried like that. Not quiet tears, but deep, shaking sobs that came from somewhere beneath my ribs. The kind of crying you do when you realize someone loved you more than you ever understood. All those years I thought of Thomas as the practical one, the one who saved receipts, balanced the checkbook, built shelves just because he hated clutter. But now I saw it. He'd been protecting me long before I knew I needed protection. I pressed the letter to my chest. Oh, Thomas, you knew. For hours I sat there thinking about our life together, the early years in that tiny apartment with a leaky ceiling. The nights he came home with grease on his hands and exhaustion in his bones, but still asked about my day. The way he'd dance with me in the kitchen to the old radio, no music but his laughter. We'd never been rich. We didn't own fancy cars or vacation homes. But we had enough, and enough was everything when you built it with love. When Rachel was born, we promised we'd give her a better life. And we did, or at least we tried. I remember the day she came home from college for Christmas. She'd changed, not in the way all young people do, but in her eyes. There was distance, the kind that comes from wanting more than what you were given. Mom, she said that night, Greg says we should invest, start thinking about real money. I laughed, thinking she was joking, but she wasn't. That was the first time she called our life small. Maybe I should have seen it then, the seed of greed planted, watered by the wrong kind of ambition. But when you're a mother, you don't see danger in your child's hunger. You just see hope. Now, years later, that hope had teeth. I looked around the kitchen, the same one where Thomas and I had painted the cabinets ourselves, where Rachel once spilled milk and cried because she thought I'd be mad. Every corner of this house was a chapter of our story. And now my own daughter wanted to erase it. I wiped my tears, folded the letter carefully, and placed it in a plastic sleeve. Then I opened a drawer and took out an old photograph, Thomas and me sitting on the front porch, laughing, our hands stained with paint from the new railing. I whispered to him, I'm not going to let them win. That night I couldn't sleep. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became, not just at Rachel, but at myself. For years I'd let people treat me like I was invisible, like being quiet meant being weak. But Thomas's words changed that. Don't you ever let anyone call you worthless. When I finally drifted off to sleep, the decision was already made. The next morning, I called Mr. Daniels, the lawyer. When he answered, I didn't waste time. Mr. Daniels, I said, Thomas left me something I think you need to see. There was a pause. He told me this day might come, he said quietly. Do you still have the letter? Yes. Good. Don't show it to anyone else. Bring it to my office tomorrow morning. As I hung up, I looked out the kitchen window at the old oak tree in the yard, the one Thomas had planted the year Rachel was born. Its roots were deep, too deep for any storm to rip out, and for the first time in years, I felt the same way. I wasn't that fragile woman at the diner anymore. I wasn't the mother begging for scraps of kindness. I was the woman Thomas believed in, and now it was time to remind everyone, especially my daughter, just who they were dealing with. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The house was still the kind of stillness that presses against your ears until you hear your own heartbeat. I brewed a pot of coffee just like I used to for Thomas and sat at the kitchen table with his letter beside me. The words, box number 217, Franklin Community Bank, burned into my mind. I hadn't been inside that bank in years. Thomas used to handle everything deposit statements, even the safe deposit box we rented back in the 90s when he first got promoted at the plant. After he passed, I assumed it had been closed. I never asked, never checked. I'd been too lost in grief to think about paperwork. Now, 12 years later, I was walking back into that same lobby, same marbled floor, same flickering ceiling light over the teller stations. The young woman at the counter smiled politely. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today? I believe my late husband had a safety deposit box here," I said, handing her my ID. "Thomas Whitaker, box number 217. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Then she frowned. "One moment, please." She disappeared into a back office. My stomach knotted. I half expected her to return with security to tell me I was mistaken, that it had been emptied years ago. But when she came back, she was holding a small clipboard. "Yes, ma'am, it's still active. You're listed as co-owner." For a second, I forgot how to breathe. She escorted me to the vault area, cold quiet, smelling faintly of metal and floor polish. I signed my name on the log, my hand trembling, and she brought out a long steel box. "Take your time, Mrs. Whitaker," she said softly, and left me alone. I opened the lid. Inside were several envelopes neatly stacked. On top, a folded note in Thomas's handwriting. "If you found this, you've already fought enough. What's inside will finish the rest." Beneath it was a sealed envelope marked "Original Will, not to be altered." My heart pounded as I carefully opened it. Inside, I saw his familiar signature and then something that nearly made me drop the papers. Under primary beneficiary, Thomas had written Margaret Whitaker, of course. But under secondary beneficiary, it didn't say Rachel. It said Lily Ann Whitaker, my granddaughter. I scanned the next page, the clause about the property. Thomas had written in clear, deliberate language, "The family residence at 424 Birchwood Lane is to remain under the ownership of my wife Margaret Whitaker until her death. Upon her passing, it shall transfer to my granddaughter Lily Ann Whitaker. No sale, transfer, or mortgage shall occur without written consent from both parties." I covered my mouth. Oh, Thomas. He'd known. He'd seen Rachel and Greg for who they really were years before I did. But that wasn't all. At the bottom of the box was a small flash drive taped to a folded receipt from Daniels & Associates law firm. On the back, Thomas had scribbled one line, "Play this only if they try to take what's yours." I tucked everything carefully into my purse, the will, the flash drive, the note, and walked straight out of the bank. By the time I reached Mr. Daniels' office downtown, my hands were still shaking. He was waiting for me by the door as if he'd known I was coming, Mrs. "Whitaker," he said, smiling kindly, "you look like you've seen a ghost. Maybe I have." I said, handing him the letter, "Thomas told me to show you this." He read it quickly, then nodded. He mentioned something like this before he passed, said he didn't trust the copies Rachel insisted on filing. "She filed her own version?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "About a year after Thomas's death, she came in claiming you'd given permission to update the terms. I refused, of course. But later, another lawyer one she hired submitted a version that removed you as sole owner." My chest tightened. "You mean she forged it?" He sighed. "I can't say that officially, but the signatures didn't match." He motioned toward the flash drive. "May I?" I nodded. He plugged it into his computer, and for a moment the only sound was the faint hum of the machine. Then Thomas's voice filled the room. "If you're hearing this, I guess I'm gone. Maggie." I made this recording for one reason, to make sure no one can twist my words. My throat closed up. I could barely breathe. "The house stays with you, Maggie. That's not negotiable. Rachel and Greg, they're not ready. I've seen what greed does to people. Don't let them bully you into selling. And if they try, go to Daniels. He has everything." Tears blurred my vision. I could almost see him sitting there in his flannel shirt, speaking softly but firmly, the way he always did when he meant business. Mr. Daniels turned to me. "Mrs. Whitaker, this recording changes everything. It's time-stamped, dated, and authenticated. If they've filed a fraudulent will, we'll expose it in court." I swallowed hard. "You mean I can fight this?" He smiled. "Not just fight, win." When I walked out of that office, the autumn wind hit my face cold and sharp, but I didn't feel fragile anymore. I felt alive. I drove straight home, parked in the driveway, and sat there staring at the house. The front porch where Thomas and I used to drink coffee. The curtains I'd sewn myself, the oak tree that had stood through every storm. It wasn't just wood and walls. It was a promise. I thought about Rachel's smug smile, Greg's clipboard, the way everyone had looked at me like I was nothing. Well, they were about to learn that nothing, when pushed too far, becomes something unbreakable. As the porch light flickered on, I whispered to the empty air, "Thomas, I found it. I found everything." And for the first time in a long time, I could almost hear his voice in the wind, steady, warm, proud. That's my Maggie. I didn't call Rachel right away. In fact, I didn't call her at all. For the first time in months, I let the phone ring and ring until her voice went to voicemail, her fake sweetness dripping through the machine. "Hi, Mom. It's me again. We just want to talk about your next steps, beep." Next steps. She had no idea how right she was, but not in the way she thought. That night, I sat in Thomas's old office, surrounded by the quiet hum of the house. The flash drive, the will, and his letter were laid out on the desk like pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. I'd spent my whole life playing the polite mother, the peacemaker, the quiet one who smoothed over every argument. But that woman was gone. Now I had work to do. The first thing I did was call Lily. When she answered, her voice was small but determined. "Grandma, did you find anything?" "I did," I said. "More than they'd ever want me to." "Should we tell Mom?" "Not yet." There was a pause. "So what do we do?" I smiled faintly, the kind of smile I hadn't felt in years, quiet, calm, and sharp. "We let them think they've won." The next morning, I drove to the grocery store in town, the same place I used to work before they replaced me with machines. I bumped into a familiar face, Marjorie, one of my old coworkers. She was in her 60s, short, round, and always full of gossip. Margaret. "Lord, I haven't seen you in forever." "How have you been?" "Oh, you know," I said, smiling gently. "Just living day by day. My daughter's been helping me handle things." Marjorie's eyes narrowed the way small-town women's eyes do when they smell drama. "Helping? Huh? Is that what she calls it? I heard she's been talking to realtors." My chest tightened, but I kept my face calm. "Really?" She nodded, lowering her voice. "My nephew works at Keller & Grant Realty. Said your house was listed under family transfer last week. But the listing disappeared yesterday, said there was a legal hold." I felt my heart skip a beat. Daniels must have already acted. I smiled politely. "Well, Marjorie, you know how rumors go." But inside, I was smiling for real. That afternoon, I decided to test my daughter. I called Rachel. The line picked up almost instantly. "Mom, finally. You had me worried sick. Greg said you've been ignoring us." "I've just been tired," I said softly. "I've been thinking about what you said about the house." Her tone shifted instantly, sugar over steel. "Oh, Mom, I'm so glad. We only want what's best for you." "I know, honey. Maybe we can sit down and go over the paperwork together. You and Greg could bring whatever documents you've been working on." Silence. Then too quickly. "Of course. That's a great idea. We agreed to meet that Sunday evening at my house." The moment I hung up, I called Daniels. "They're coming," I said. He didn't hesitate. "Good. Don't confront them. Let them talk. I'll handle the rest." Sunday came fast. I spent the day cleaning, not because I wanted the house to look nice for them, but because it calmed my nerves. I scrubbed every counter, polished every frame, and even baked Thomas's favorite cornbread. The smell filled the air, warm and familiar. When Rachel and Greg pulled up, their black SUV looked like a shadow cutting through my driveway. They stepped out dressed like they were meeting investors, not their mother. Mom Rachel said, stepping inside without waiting to be invited. "You look nice." "Is that cornbread?" I smiled. "Your father's recipe. Thought I'd make something we could all enjoy." Greg gave me a thin smile. "Let's get this over with, shall we?" They sat up at the dining table, my dining table, and pulled out a stack of papers. I sat opposite them, calm and polite. Rachel spoke first, tapping her manicured nails on the folder. "So we've finalized the deed transfer. Once you sign here and here, the house will be under our names, but don't worry. You'll still live here until well, you know." I raised an eyebrow. "Until I die." She smiled like I'd said something amusing. "You said it, not me." I chuckled softly, pretending not to notice the venom. You really thought of everything, didn't you? Greg nodded. We're just being practical. This protects everyone. Of course, I said. May I see the papers? They slid them across the table. I picked them up, adjusted my glasses, and pretended to skim. Inside my stomach twisted, I recognized the forged signature. My name written in neat but wrong strokes already printed on the last page. I looked up. You already signed for me. Rachel didn't blink. It's a draft copy, Mom, just to show you how it'll look. I smiled. How thoughtful. Then before I could speak again, there was a knock at the door. Rachel frowned. Are you expecting someone? I stood. Actually, yes. When I opened the door, Mr. Daniels stepped inside, briefcase in hand. He nodded politely. Evening, Mrs. Whitaker. Then he turned to them. Rachel. Greg. Greg's face drained of color. What the hell is this? Relax, I said. Sweetly. I just thought you might want a professional here since we're discussing legal matters. Rachel forced a smile. Mr. Daniels, we already have our own attorney. Oh, I know, he said calmly, setting his briefcase on the table. And he'll be very interested in this. He opened the case and laid down a manila folder, the original will, the recording transcript, and the deed copy from the bank. Rachel's eyes widened. Greg's hand twitched toward the papers. This is ridiculous, he said. That's not binding. It's old, legally notarized, time-stamped, and stored under bank custody, Daniels interrupted, which makes it more binding than whatever this fabricated document is. Rachel's jaw dropped. You can't prove Daniels hit play on his phone. Thomas's voice filled the room. The house stays with you, Maggie. That's not negotiable. Rachel and Greg aren't ready. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Rachel's eyes darted to me, shock, then fury. Mom, she said through clenched teeth, how could you? I tilted my head. How could I? You tried to steal your father's legacy. Greg slammed his hand on the table. We were trying to help you. By lying, by forging my name. I asked, my voice suddenly sharp. You think because I'm old, I'm blind. No one spoke. Even the air seemed to stand still. Daniels closed his briefcase. I suggest you both leave now. Mrs. Whitaker will be filing charges first thing in the morning. Rachel's voice trembled. You wouldn't do that to your own daughter. I looked at her for a long moment. You stopped being my daughter when you called me worthless. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Greg grabbed her arm. Come on, Rachel. They walked out without another word. I stood there shaking, not from fear, but from release. When the door finally clicked shut, I let out a long breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Daniels gave me a small smile. You did well, Margaret. I nodded, tears prickling my eyes. Thomas did better. He chuckled softly. He always planned ahead. As he left, I turned toward the living room window. Outside, the porch light flickered in the wind. For years, that light had meant loneliness. Now it felt like victory waiting to be claimed. By Monday morning, the entire town seemed to know something had happened. That's the thing about small Ohio towns. News travels faster than decency. Marjorie, from the grocery store, called before breakfast. Margaret, honey, are you all right? I heard your daughter stormed out of your house screaming about lawyers. I sighed. I'm fine, Marjorie. Well, she whispered. Everyone at church is saying there's going to be a court thing. I smiled faintly. There might be. And there was. Mr. Daniels called me that afternoon. They've filed a petition to contest the will, Mrs. Whitaker, he said. Rachel claims the recording is fabricated and that you manipulated your husband's estate. I laughed, a hollow, humorless sound. So now I'm the criminal. She's desperate, he said. That's what people do when the truth corners them. He paused before adding, the court scheduled a preliminary hearing on Friday morning. I'll handle everything, but you'll need to be present. I looked around the kitchen, the same one they'd tried to take from me, and said I wouldn't miss it. Friday came cold and gray. I wore my best beige coat, the one I'd saved for Easter Sundays, and pinned Thomas's old tie clip to my lapel. He used to wear it every time we faced something difficult. Funerals, mortgage meetings, his mother's hospital bills. Good luck charm, he'd say. The courthouse wasn't far, a modest brick building with peeling paint and a flag fluttering weakly in the wind. As I walked up the steps, I saw Rachel and Greg standing near the entrance. She wore black dramatic like a grieving widow, and Greg had his hand on her shoulder whispering something. They looked up when they saw me. "Mom," Rachel said stiffly. "Rachel," I replied, keeping my voice calm. Greg smirked. "Hope you brought your paperwork." "Oh, I did," I said, "and a few surprises." Inside the courtroom was small but packed. Reporters from the local paper had shown up along with half the town's retirees who had nothing better to do on a Friday. I caught sight of Lily sitting quietly in the back row. She gave me a small nod, steady, strong, and I felt my courage steady. The judge, a gray-haired man with a voice like gravel, called the room to order. Rachel's lawyer, a slick young man who probably practiced his expressions in the mirror, began first. "Your Honor," he said, "we're here to address a matter of undue influence. My client believes that her late father's estate has been manipulated by outside parties, namely, Mrs. Margaret Whitaker." He turned toward me, flashing a polished smile. "We have reason to believe that the will presented last week is forged and the recording submitted by the defense is falsified." The audience murmured. Mr. Daniels stood slowly, calm as ever. "Your Honor, the so-called forged document was stored under bank custody for 12 years. It bears verified notarization serial numbers and was sealed until retrieved by Mrs. Whitaker. Furthermore, we have voice authentication, confirming that the recording is indeed that of the late Thomas Whitaker." Rachel's lawyer raised an eyebrow. "And you expect us to take your word for that?" Daniel smiled. "No, which is why we brought proof." He motioned toward the side door. It opened, and in walked Mr. Harris, the branch manager of Franklin Community Bank. The courtroom buzzed. Harris took the stand and held up a document. "This is our access log. Box 217 has been active since 2011 under the names Thomas and Margaret Whitaker. It was accessed by Mrs. Whitaker last week for the first time since Mr. Whitaker's death." Rachel's lawyer tried to interject, but Harris continued. "The signature cards, the timestamp digital keys, and the security footage all confirm that the contents were untouched for over a decade." He handed the file to the judge. Daniel stepped forward again. "Additionally, Your Honor, the audio recording includes a unique identifier, a ticking sound from Mr. Whitaker's old pocket watch, which has been in Mrs. Whitaker's possession since his passing. We can provide the physical watch for comparison." He placed it on the table. The old brass watch glinted under the fluorescent lights. I could almost hear Thomas's laugh echo in the back of my mind. Rachel's face paled. Greg leaned in, whispering furiously, "Say something!" She stood trembling. He didn't mean for it to be permanent. My father," he said. The judge raised a hand. "Ms. Whitaker, unless you have evidence, please refrain from speculation." Rachel's voice cracked. "This isn't fair. She's manipulating everyone." The judge looked over his glasses. "You mean your mother?" The courtroom went dead silent. For a moment I almost felt sorry for her, standing there, makeup perfect, but soul in ruins. Almost. Daniels turned toward the bench. "Your Honor, we ask that the court recognize the legitimacy of the original will, the audio statement, and the transfer of property rights as outlined by Mr. Whitaker. Furthermore, we request a restraining order preventing further harassment by the petitioners." The judge nodded slowly, reviewing the paperwork. "I'll make my ruling Monday. In the meantime, Mrs. Whitaker retains full possession of the property." Rachel gasped. Greg muttered a curse under his breath. When the session adjourned, people began to murmur again, some whispering my name, others shaking their heads in disbelief. I didn't care. As I walked out of that courtroom, the sun finally broke through the clouds, a pale golden light spilling across the courthouse steps. Rachel caught up to me outside. "You think this is over?" she hissed. I turned to her, calm as still water. "It's over when you learn respect." She glared at me, eyes burning. "You're going to regret humiliating me like that." I smiled faintly. "You already did that yourself." She stood there, shaking her face twisted between rage and shame. Greg grabbed her arm again, but before he could pull her away, another voice spoke clear and young. Mom Lily said, stepping forward, "Maybe it's time you stop pretending Dad's greed was love." Rachel froze. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Lily said, voice trembling but steady. "Grandpa saw who you were a long time ago. I see it now, too." For a second, I thought Rachel might slap her, but she didn't. She just turned jaw tight and stormed off toward the parking lot. Lily slipped her hand into mine. "Are you okay, Grandma?" I looked at her, tears in my eyes, but pride in my chest. Better than I've been in years. We stood there on the courthouse steps, watching their car disappear down the street. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over yet. Not really. People like Greg don't give up when there's money involved, and I could feel it, the calm before the final storm. The weekend after the hearing felt like standing in the eye of a storm too calm to trust. The house was quiet again, but not the kind of quiet that brings peace. It was the kind that waits. Mr. Daniels had said the judge would announce the decision Monday morning. Until then, all I could do was wait and pray that Thomas's foresight, his careful handwriting, and old-fashioned decency would be enough to keep me safe. But deep down, I knew my daughter. Rachel wasn't the kind of woman to accept defeat quietly. She was her father's child in name, but her heart had turned into something he wouldn't have recognized: pride wrapped in entitlement. And sure enough, on Sunday night, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. It was Lily. Her voice was trembling. "Grandma, Mom, and Greg are outside. They're arguing. I think they're coming to your house." I looked out the window, and there it was. Their black SUV crawling up the driveway like a shadow come to life. I hung up quickly and took a deep breath. "All right, Thomas," I whispered to the empty room. Time for one last miracle. When the doorbell rang, I didn't flinch. I opened the door slowly. "Rachel," I said. "Greg." Rachel's makeup was smudged, her hair a mess. Greg looked worse, pale, jittery, angry. He pushed past me without asking. "We need to talk." "Of course you do," I said, closing the door behind them. Rachel's voice cracked. "You ruined us, Mom. Do you know what's going to happen when that will is approved?" "We'll have nothing." "That's not my fault," I said. "That's called consequences." Greg slammed a folder down on the table. "You think you've won, but you haven't. You don't even know half of it." I glanced at the folder, but didn't touch it. "Is that another fake document?" He smirked. "No. It's proof that you're not who you think you are." I almost laughed. "Oh, Greg, please don't embarrass yourself." He opened the folder. Inside was a stack of photocopies. "These are the old mortgage statements. Guess what? You and Thomas missed 3 payments back in 2009. Technically, that property could have been seized if someone reopened the case. We could still take it through foreclosure loopholes." Rachel nodded quickly, desperate. "Greg found it last night. There's a way, Mom. You can't hide behind that will forever." I just stood there looking at them, my daughter and her husband clutching at straws, willing to dig through decades of memories just to find a new way to steal. And then quietly I said, "Funny, Thomas mentioned that year in his letter." They froze. "What Greg asked?" I walked to the desk, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a small sealed envelope, one I hadn't shown anyone yet, not even Daniels. On the front, in Thomas's handwriting, were the words, "For the day they try again." I opened it slowly, letting the paper rustle just loud enough to make them uneasy. Inside was another handwritten note and a thin flash drive. Rachel's voice shook. "What is that?" I smiled faintly. "Proof that Thomas knew you better than you knew yourself." I walked over to the old laptop in the living room, plugged in the drive, and hit play. The screen lit up, and there he was, Thomas. His face was older than the last time I saw him, but his eyes, kind, steady, unshakable, still looked right into me. "Maggie," he said, his voice soft, "if you're seeing this, it means they didn't stop. I knew they wouldn't. So I left something for you and for the court if it ever comes to that." Rachel gasped. "Oh my God. The year we missed those payments, Greg's company, Whitaker and Moore Holdings, refinanced through a proxy account using our property as collateral. I didn't tell you then because I didn't want to worry you, but I found out later after looking through Rachel's files. They were using our house to fund Greg's debts." Greg's face went white. "That's not true." But Thomas kept speaking. "I recorded everything, every phone call, every meeting. Daniels has copies of the statements and the audio files. If they ever try to twist things again, show them this. And Maggie, you tell our granddaughter that she's the only one who ever deserved any of it." Rachel stumbled backward, her hands over her mouth. "Dad, no!" Greg lunged toward the laptop. "Turn it off," I stepped between them. "Touch that and you'll add trespassing to your list of crimes." He froze. On the screen, Thomas's voice continued firmer now. If this message ever sees the light of day, I want the world to know greed is a disease and I refuse to let it infect my family any longer. The estate, the house, every cent it belongs to Margaret and Lily. That's final. The recording ended. For a long time, no one moved. The only sound was the old grandfather clock ticking in the hall, the same one that had watched over every argument, every birthday, every lie. Rachel sank into a chair, sobbing. He recorded us all those years. Greg looked like a cornered animal. You can't prove. The front door opened. Mr. Daniels stepped inside, holding up his phone. Oh, I think we can. Rachel's head snapped up. What? He nodded toward the small red light blinking on the counter. You see, Mrs. Whitaker called me earlier. This entire conversation, every word you just said, has been recorded and transmitted to my office. Greg's shoulders slumped. You set us up. I looked him in the eye. No, Greg, you set yourselves up. I just stopped pretending I didn't see it. He opened his mouth, but Daniels cut in. I'll be submitting both recordings and Thomas's supplemental evidence to the court first thing in the morning. I suggest you contact your lawyer. Rachel looked at me, tears, guilt, shame all tangled together. Mom, I didn't know about the mortgage thing, I swear. I stared at her, my daughter, my blood, the woman who once called me worthless in front of strangers. And for the first time in my life, I didn't see her as family. I saw her as a stranger who'd finally been unmasked. Rachel, I said quietly, your father tried to protect you, even when you didn't deserve it. But you threw that away. I'm done cleaning up after you. She broke down completely, her sobs echoing through the house. Daniels touched my shoulder gently. It's over, Mrs. Whitaker. But I shook my head. No, I said softly. It's just finally fair. Greg stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Rachel followed slower, her head bowed. I didn't chase her. I just stood there looking at the screen that still showed Thomas's frozen smile. I whispered, You did it, love. You really did it. Outside, the wind picked up and the oak tree rustled the sound like an old man laughing softly in the breeze. For the first time in 12 years, I felt safe. The following weeks passed like slow thunder rolling across the sky, not loud but heavy, constant, unstoppable. Mr. Daniels handled everything. The moment the judge received Thomas's second recording and the financial records tied to Greg's company, the tide turned completely. The court ruled the will valid, the recordings authentic, and the fraudulent filings criminal. Rachel and Greg were ordered to pay damages not just to me but to the estate they'd tried to steal. The final number made even Daniels raise an eyebrow, $142,000 in restitution and loss of all claim to the Birchwood property. When he told me, I didn't cheer. I just sat there quietly holding my coffee, letting it sink in. Congratulations, he said softly. I smiled faintly. It doesn't feel like winning. It just feels done. He nodded. Justice often does. A few days later, I was at Maple Grove Diner, the same place where it had all started. Same cracked leather booths, same burnt coffee smell, same flickering neon sign buzzing above the window. The waitress, the kind young woman who'd seen Rachel humiliate me months ago, smiled when she saw me. Well, look who's back, she said. Haven't seen you in a while, Ms. Whitaker. I smiled. It's good to be back. As I stirred my coffee, I glanced up and nearly froze. Across the diner, sitting alone in the corner, was Rachel. Her hair wasn't styled anymore. No expensive clothes, no gold bracelets, just a plain sweater, her eyes hollow. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. When she finally looked up and saw me, she froze too. I didn't move. Neither did she. Then slowly, she stood and walked over. Her voice was soft, fragile, in a way I hadn't heard since she was a little girl. Mom, she whispered. I looked at her carefully. Rachel. I wanted to apologize. Her hand shook. I was stupid. I was greedy. I thought Dad owed me something. I sipped my coffee and said nothing. Tears welled in her eyes. I lost everything, Mom. Greg's gone. His business collapsed after the court released those financial records. He left town last week. Good, I said quietly. She blinked. You're not even surprised? "No," I said, "I'm not." Her lip trembled. "I just wanted to tell you I'm sorry. For everything I said, for what I did, for calling you worthless." For a long time I didn't answer. I just looked at her, this grown woman who once held my hand crossing the street, who used to crawl into my lap after nightmares. I wanted to hate her. But hate is a fire that burns the one holding it too. So I took a slow breath and said, "Rachel, I forgave you the moment I realized you didn't know who you were anymore. But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't expect you to forget. I just don't want to be lost anymore." Something in me softened just a little. Then start by being honest. Work. Earn your own peace. You don't have to be rich to be good. She nodded, her shoulders shaking. "I'll try." As she turned to leave, I called out softly, "Rachel." She looked back, eyes red. "You were never worthless," I said, "but you made yourself small by trying to take what wasn't yours. Don't do that again." She managed a weak smile before walking out into the gray Ohio afternoon. When the door closed behind her, the waitress came over. "Was that your daughter?" I nodded. She looked... "Sorry." "Maybe she is," I said. "Maybe it's too late. But that's not my burden anymore." A week later, the Columbus Daily Tribune ran an article titled, "Local Woman Wins Legal Battle After Family Fraud Judge Cites Unshakable Integrity." I didn't tell anyone I was the woman in the headline, but people in town already knew. Strangers stopped me at the grocery store, some shaking my hand, others whispering, "Good for you, honey. You showed them." It felt strange to be noticed after years of being invisible. But the best part wasn't the praise. It was the peace. Bills were finally caught up. The house was mine, legally, permanently, untouchably mine. And every morning I made 2 cups of coffee again. One for me, one for Thomas. I'd set his mug by the window just like I used to and say softly, "We did it." One evening, Lily came by after school, her backpack slung over her shoulder. She handed me a folded envelope. "Grandma, this came for you at the lawyer's office." Inside was a notice from the court, the official confirmation of property ownership transfer to me and upon my death to Lillian Whitaker. She read it aloud, her eyes wide. "Grandpa really left it to me," I smiled. "He trusted you. He saw your heart." She hugged me tight. "I'll take care of it, Grandma, I promise." "I know you will," I said, my voice breaking just a little. As she left, I stood on the porch watching her walk down the driveway, strong, smart kind. Everything Rachel could have been if greed hadn't blinded her. I whispered to the wind, "The right person got the house after all." And somewhere in that rustling oak tree, I swear I could almost hear Thomas laugh again, proud, soft, and free. The past had finally let me go. Rachel had vanished from the town gossip. Greg was under investigation for fraud. The whispers faded, replaced by something new: respect. People saw me now not as a poor widow, but as a woman who refused to be erased. And sometimes late at night, I'd think about that night at the diner, her voice saying, "You've always been worthless." Now I could finally smile and whisper back, "No, sweetheart. I was just waiting for you to learn what worth really means." It's been 6 months since that day in court. The leaves have turned golden again. The air carries that crisp Ohio chill that smells like wood smoke and memory. The house feels different now, lighter somehow. Not because anything changed, but because I did. Every morning I still make 2 cups of coffee. One for me, one for Thomas. I set his mug by the window where the sunlight hits just right and whisper, "We did it, love. They can't touch us anymore." Some mornings I hear the church bells from down the hill and I smile. Because for years I prayed for peace. I thought it would come from someone saving me from Rachel's apology, from the court's ruling, from something outside myself. But it didn't. It came from the moment I decided to stop begging for love that hurt to hold. A few weeks ago, I got a letter. It wasn't from the court this time. It was from Rachel. It wasn't long, just a few handwritten lines on plain notebook paper. "Mom, I've been seeing a counselor. I'm working now part-time at a community center. It's not much, but it's honest. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm trying to be better. I hope someday you'll believe me. Love, Rachel." I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after reading it. The part of me that used to ache for her approval felt quiet. Not healed, not broken, just still. Maybe that's what forgiveness really is, not erasing what happened, but finally refusing to let it define you. I wrote her back. Just one line. Keep trying. That's all any of us can do. I didn't sign Love, Mom. Not yet. Maybe someday. Life has a strange way of circling back to the things that matter most. The diner where I was humiliated is now where I go every Sunday after church. The same waitress still serves me, always with that kind smile. Last week she refilled my coffee and said, "Ms. Whitaker, every time you walk in here, I think of how strong you are. You give the rest of us hope." I laughed softly. Hope's a funny thing, I told her. It always shows up late, but right on time. Sometimes people from town still stop me at the grocery store. They say, "You're that lady from the paper, right? The one whose daughter took her to court." And I smile politely and say, "No, I'm the lady who got her house back," because that's the truth. I didn't just win a legal battle. I took my dignity back. The best part, though, has been watching Lily grow into herself. She comes over every weekend. Now helps me with the garden, tells me about college plans. She talks about studying law, says she wants to help people who've been taken advantage of. I always smile and say, "You'd make your grandpa proud." Sometimes we sit on the porch at dusk, watching the light fade through the oak tree. She'll ask about the past, about how I met Thomas, about how I survived after losing him. And I tell her the truth. Love is supposed to make you strong, not small. And the people who truly love you never make you beg for respect. She listens quietly, her head on my shoulder. And in those moments, I know Thomas was right to trust her to skip a generation and give the future to the one who still had a heart big enough to hold it. Now, when I walk through the house, I don't see ghosts anymore. I see memories, the kind that don't hurt, the kind that warm you from the inside out. The smell of Thomas's cologne still lingers in the closet. His old flannel shirt still hangs by the door. I don't move it. Some things don't need fixing. I've learned that peace isn't the absence of pain, it's the choice to keep living despite it. I may be an old woman with gray hair and shaky hands, but I've got something my daughter never understood. I know who I am. I don't need sympathy. I don't need pity. I just need people to look at me and see what I've always been worthy. Sometimes at night when the house settles and the crickets start their quiet song, I sit by the window and think about that moment at the diner. Her voice still echoes, "Even now, Mom, you've always been worthless." And I smile. Because that insult, that humiliation, was the spark that reminded me who I was. Without it, maybe I never would have found the letter. Maybe I never would have fought back. Maybe I never would have remembered that worth isn't given, it's claimed. So in a strange way, I thank her. Not for the pain, but for waking me up. If Thomas were here now, I think he'd just smile, pour himself a cup of coffee, and say, "See, I told you she was tougher than she looked." And I'd laugh, roll my eyes, and tell him he still makes a mess when he stirs the sugar. But when I look at his picture, now that same gentle smile, those same steady eyes, I don't feel loss anymore. I feel presence. Because love like that doesn't leave. It just changes shape. So if you're listening, if you're sitting somewhere feeling small, unseen, unappreciated, remember this. People can take your things, your name, your comfort, but they can't take your worth unless you hand it to them. I learned that the hard way sitting in a diner with tears on my plate and a daughter who forgot my name meant something, but I also learned this. You don't need their apology to stand up. You just need your own courage to walk away. And when you do, when you finally stop begging to be valued, you'll find something better than revenge. You'll find peace.